Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris, published in 1988, and I'm comparing it with the movie directed by Jonathan Demme, which was released in 1991. In December, I covered Red Dragon, which is the first book in the Hannibal Lecter series, and there's two adaptations, one called Manhunter from the 80s, and then there is Red Dragon from 2002. And the book Red Dragon is fantastic, and the Manhunter adaptation, I loved it so much. And yeah, it is now time to cover the second book in the series, which is the most famous due to the fact that it was adapted into this Academy Award-winning film starring Anthony Hopkins in the role that he is most well known for. And in my Red Dragon video, I say that as far as the 2002 adaptation of Red Dragon stars Anthony Hopkins, but then Manhunter stars Brian Cox in the role. And as far as those two movies in particular go, I prefer Brian Cox's portrayal, which I still stand by. However, when it comes to The Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins, of course, is astounding, and all of the praise he received for this role is well deserved. But then also Jodie Foster, I thought she was also just excellent as Clarice Starling. And that scene when she is telling Lecter about her childhood, it is one of those movie moments where I am just glued to the screen and holding my breath because it is just that gripping. And when I went back to get screenshots for this movie, during this scene, I wasn't even watching it. I was just pausing and getting screenshots. It almost made me get teary. The scene is just so potent and so powerful, and Jodie Foster is just incredible. So yeah, anyway, fantastic performances. And then we also get some really cool camera work here. And one of my favorite shots is when Starling is talking to Lecter through his glass cell, and the camera is on her while she is listening to Lecter, but we see his face in the reflection. And that was just such a creepy, eerie shot, and I absolutely loved it. And then also another detail is that whenever Clarice is talking to a man, the camera is right on the person's face, and he is looking into the lens of the camera. But then when we are on Starling's face, she is looking off to the side of the camera. And this is done to help put us in the shoes of Clarice Starling, and I thought it was very effective. And when reading this book, there are a number of references to Red Dragon. However, you can still read this book without having read the first one, and you won't be lost or confused. However, Will Graham's fate will be spoiled in Red Dragon if you read Silence of the Lambs first. And then also I wanted to say that this movie was released on Valentine's Day, 1991, so we are very close to its 34th anniversary. And also the book takes place around Valentine's Day, so that's kind of funny. Whereas the movie was released on Valentine's Day, and yet no mention of the holiday is made in the movie itself. But one more thing about the release date. So this came out February 1991, and then it was nominated for Oscars in March of 1992, so a whole 13 months later, and yet this movie won so many awards. And so that's just how incredible it was, is that a year, 13 months later, people still remembered it and wanted it to be nominated and to win all of these awards. But yeah, so I just thought that was another fun fact about this movie. And before we get into spoilers, I also want to acknowledge that I straightened my hair today. My hair is naturally curly, and I kind of regret the decision. I don't feel like myself when my hair is straight. So I'm just like, why did I do this? But yeah, so my hair is straight today, and you won't see it like this very often because I definitely prefer when it's curly. And yeah, now it's time to get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So this movie is incredibly faithful to the book, and so much is just taken right from the book. And chances are, if there is a line or a scene in the movie that you love, 99% of the time, chances are it came right from the book. The only exception being the final line when he says, "I'm having an old friend for dinner," which of course is just so iconic. That is one of the few lines that actually did not come from the book. But yeah, in both, the basic gist, we have Clarice Starling. She is in training to become a member of the FBI when Jack Crawford calls for her, and he wants her to see the infamous Hannibal Lecter under the guise of getting him to fill out a profile on himself. But really what Crawford wants is to learn if Lecter knows anything about the serial killer on the loose who is being called Buffalo Bill. And turns out Lecter does have info on Buffalo Bill, and through the course of the story, Starling pays Lecter multiple visits in order to learn more about the killer. And Lecter will give her information, and in return, he asks Starling questions about her personal life. And in the end, Lecter is able to escape custody, and Starling catches and kills Buffalo Bill, whose real name is Jame Gumb, and she saves the woman that was going to be his next victim. And I will just begin getting into the character of Lecter, because I feel like for so much of this movie, you kind of forget what a monster he is, despite people warning Clarice about this, of course. Because for one, he has like a code of ethics, despite who he is. For example, the first time she sees him, he gives her nothing, and he doesn't tell her anything. And it isn't until she is leaving, when she's having to pass other prisoners, and one of them throws semen on her, and Lecter hears this and knows what is happening, and so he calls out to her, and when she returns to him, he then gives her information, and the only reason he does this is because he is disgusted by what the other prisoner has done. And yeah, he ends up forming a type of respect for Starling, and in the end, he calls her up and tells her he won't be visiting her, aka killing her, because he thinks the world is a more interesting place with her in it. Meanwhile, he has a strong dislike for the guy in charge of the prison, a man named Dr. Chilton, and he is someone that the reader also dislikes, and so in some ways it seems like Lecter is a good judge of character. And in the book, he jokes how if you read about Chilton's educational background, it makes for quick reading because Chilton isn't very smart. And in the book too, we learn he doesn't even have a PhD or anything, and so yeah, he's just someone that the reader does not respect, and Clarice doesn't like him, and Lecter doesn't like him either. And also, it is due to Chilton's own stupidity and pride that Lecter is even able to escape in the end, and also Starling was getting real information from Lecter, and yet Chilton screws that up too. And then also in both, so the latest woman Buffalo Bill has kidnapped, she is the daughter of a senator, and Chilton, he calls up the senator and has a meeting set up between Lecter and the senator, and when they meet in the book, Chilton reveals Lecter to her with this dramatic flourish. And we read that in the book at this moment, the senator is realizing oh man, this guy is an idiot. But yeah, the way Lecter escapes is that he steals a pen from Chilton, and that is how he is able to undo his handcuffs and get away in the end. And then that line at the very end of the movie, when Lecter calls Starling and he says the famous line about how he is having an old friend for dinner, we see that he is watching Chilton. And I have not seen the next film. I will be covering it though, probably maybe in March, but honestly probably not until April. But anyway, I have not yet seen it. And if he ends up killing Chilton in that, I honestly won't mind because he was such a frustrating character. But yeah, like I was saying, you almost forget that he is such a monster. And so when he ends up killing those two guards who were good people, right? They were just doing their job. And yet he kills them in such a graphic way, you are reminded what a horrible person he is. And yeah, in the movie, he hangs one of the men up on the bars, which was very gruesome. But then of course, in the book and movie, he also cuts the face off of one of the men and he wears it and he makes them think that he is that guard, but that Lecter just cut up his face really bad and yet he is still alive. And so then when he is taken in the ambulance, he removes the face and kills the paramedics. And so yeah, when this happens, you are just wow, it's a stark reminder of the type of person he truly is and how he is someone who needs to be behind bars or killed. But then Clarice Starling is someone that I absolutely love in both book and movie. She is so competent and smart and level-headed and honest. And this is not one of those books that has the main character making dumb, rash decisions or not even rash decisions, but just being so stupid. This isn't like that at all. And in fact, it's kind of the exact opposite because Starling, as well as the other FBI agents, Jack Crawford, they are all so competent and are always making smart decisions. But Starling in particular, she was just so fantastic, and we see how resourceful she is while also seeing her humanity. And in both, she tells Lecter that her father died when she was very young, and so she was sent to live with a relative who lived on a ranch. And in the book, we learn that they had horses that they would fatten up only to be sent away to be killed, but that they also had sheep, which they would also slaughter. In the movie, they get rid of the horse aspect of the ranch, but in both, she wakes up in the early morning hours and she hears the lambs screaming because they are being slaughtered. And in the book, she then gets on one of the old horses, which was going to end up being killed, and she runs away on the horse. However, she ultimately ends up being caught. Whereas in the movie, they changed this, and I think they changed it for the better because, again, the horses aren't part of the story. And instead, she wakes up and she hears the lambs, and so she goes out there and she tries to release them. However, the lambs, when she opens the pen, they just stand there and don't move. And so then she picks one of them up and she tries to run away with it, but she says how she only got a couple miles because it was so cold, but also because the lamb just got too heavy. And I love the symbolism of this, where the lamb, it's this, she's trying to save it, and yet the burden is just too much for her to bear. And she tells Lecter that she still wakes up and hears the screaming of the lambs, and Lecter wonders, like, if she saves this latest woman Bill has kidnapped, if that will silence the lambs for her. And so the screaming lambs representing these innocent victims, and Starling, she just wants to save all of them. And in the end, we see that Catherine, who again, this is Buffalo Bill's latest victim, he keeps them alive for a few days. We see that she has lured Bill's precious poodle to her and threatens to kill it. And then when Starling shows up, the dog is barking and Starling calls down for Catherine to get the dog to be quiet. And coincidentally, the dog is small and white and fluffy, just like a lamb, and Starling is trying to silence it. And also in the end, Catherine wants to keep the dog, but ultimately in the book specifically, one of the paramedics end up taking it and keeping it. But Catherine not wanting to let go of the dog could also symbolize Starling, silencing the lambs by saving Catherine, just as Catherine saved the dog. And in the very end of the book, Starling is on a trip with this guy she met, and we read, "She sleeps deeply, sweetly, in the silence of the lambs," which is just the perfect. It's the final line of the book, and it's just so perfect. And this title is so catching, right? It's just an incredible title, and the meaning behind it, and it was beautiful. But I did want to mention, as far as Catherine and the poodle, obviously I've never been in that kind of situation, but part of me is like, why would she want to keep that dog when it's part of this experience, this negative experience she had? And also, you gotta realize that Bill fed it gross things. So I would not want that dog around me when I got out personally, I don't think. And also, dogs tend to mimic the behavior of their owners. So I'm also sure that that dog wasn't a very nice one either. And so Catherine wanting to hold on to it, I'm just like, I get the symbolism of that, but the reality of it, I'm like, would she though? I don't know. But both book and movie highlight the fact that Starling is one of few women in the FBI and in law enforcement in general. And we have constant scenes where she's the only woman in the room. And we get a part when Crawford is talking to a local sheriff, and he says that he has sensitive details he needs to discuss and doesn't want to do so in front of Starling since she is a woman and, too delicate for the gory details, basically. And afterwards, Crawford tells her that was just an excuse he made up to get the sheriff alone. But Starling points out that people respect Crawford and pay attention to what he says and does. And so it matters when he says something like that because other men will therefore treat her the same. And we also see, though, that as a woman, she notices things the men don't. And so her being a different gender than the other agents works in her favor, especially when working with female victims. And we also see how she is constantly getting hit on and checked out, and men seeing her as a sex object first, rather than seeing her as an FBI agent who should be respected. And in the book, the man she is with in the very end is one of the scientists that check out the moth cocoon they find. Whereas in the movie, this guy, he flirts with her and she flirts back, but nothing actually happens with him. And I preferred in the movie the fact that nothing happens with him, because in the book, Harris, for so much of this, he's exposing the sexism of the world kind of a thing, right? And yet he ends the book with her being paired up with a man. And so I almost felt like that was kind of a sexist trope, to have a single woman be with someone in the end. Although, to be fair, she's not with him like, this could actually go somewhere. It's just her way of getting away from, this horrible case that she just helped resolve, right? And so it's her way of de-stressing, I guess. And so it's more like her just getting her mind off of things, you could say. But yeah, still, I prefer it in the movie where she is never romantically involved with anyone whatsoever. And so I think, again, that was a smart change that the movie made. But also another part that the movie doesn't have is that, again, she was in training to be part of the FBI. She doesn't even have her official license or whatever yet. And so throughout the book, she is under threat of being recycled and having to do the training all over again because she's missing so many days due to helping with this case. And ultimately, in the end, it ends up being fine. But yeah, this aspect of the story was not in the movie. And also, like I said at the start of this video, throughout the movie, when the camera is on Starling, she always looks off to the side. But then in the final shot of her, we have her looking straight into the camera, maybe showing her evolution, you could say. But now to talk about Jame Gumb, aka Buffalo Bill. So this is when I need to address the potentially problematic aspect of this movie, because Jame seems to identify as a trans woman and has applied for the surgery but was turned away. And because they do background checks as well as various personality tests to evaluate if someone is a true trans person and can be approved for the surgery. But Jame is denied, and since he can't get the surgery, he decides he is going to make a woman bodysuit, which is why he has been killing large women. And in the movie, but even more so in the book, but the movie too, they both try to make a point to show that Jame Gumb isn't a true trans person, and that instead he is someone who is very unhappy with who he is. And so he is trying to find his place in the world by trying on these different identities. And so this is just another identity he's trying on, but doesn't actually truly believe he is a woman. And in the movie, we also see that he has swastikas in his home. And of that, I read that the production design team made sure that the house was littered with memorabilia from many different places and organizations, indicating that Gumb has such an identity disorder that he has tried to be part of many walks of life and ideologies just to find a place where he fits in. And then the book also has a scene where they are asking hospitals that do these surgeries, asking them to go through their records and find someone who they had turned away from getting this done. And in the book, the doctor makes a point to say, like, hey, people who are part of the trans community, they are very peaceful, and like the fact that you think the killer is trans is kind of transphobic, essentially. And so yeah, in some ways the book does a better job at really trying to get the audience to know that Jame Gumb is not a true trans person, and really he is just someone who is very mentally unwell and has a lot of identity issues going on, but that he isn't actually trans. Like, Harris really tries to hammer that home. But yeah, Jame Gumb, Buffalo Bill, was so disturbing in what he was doing with the skins. And this aspect of the book and movie is what kept me from covering this for so long, because I had seen this movie before. It was like 10 years ago. And yeah, the serial killer aspect and the skins, all of that, it's just so disturbing to me and so disgusting. And in the book, when they got a bit too detailed about it, I just skimmed those parts because I was like, I don't need to read these details. And also something else that prevented me from covering this for a long time is the fan base. Not every person who likes this book and movie, specifically the movie, but because in high school, I remember kids quoting the line, "It puts the lotion on the skin," or "It puts the lotion in the basket." And I also remember in one of my English classes, I think when I was a junior, my teacher, for some reason, I forget the why, but he put this huge paper on the wall and kids were allowed to write on it. Like, I don't remember if they were writing quotes they liked, or I don't remember what the point was. But basically, I remember someone put this line on there, like, "It puts the lotion on the skin." And so the way people have turned this into something funny and something, again, these are teenagers, so, you know, whatever that's worth, but still, turning this into something funny and something like Buffalo Bill being this like quotable character, it's just very disturbing, and I don't like it. And he's based on a real person too, like a real killer. And so I think it's in very bad taste. And so I don't like the kind of fan base this movie has created, in a sense. And again, that's one of the things that kept me from covering this for so long, is because it's a very disturbing topic. And then the way people have taken this character and taken some of these lines and they make light of it and make it something funny. And yeah, it's just always been very off-putting to me. And yeah, just to add on top of that, the fact that the movie in particular, right, because Buffalo Bill would not be as famous, quote unquote, as he is if it had not been for the movie. And so yeah, because the movie did not do a good job at avoiding being transphobic, because of that, in the 90s and 2000s, part of what people joked about with Buffalo Bill did have to do with him being, quote unquote, trans. And I would like to think that the movie did not do this intentionally, but I think they did overestimate the general population by assuming the public wouldn't take this character and run with it in all sorts of problematic ways and turning him into a joke that is offensive and hurtful. So I just think the movie, it's such a fantastic movie in so many ways. And so it's unfortunate that it has this aspect of it as well that, again, maybe a certain more mature audience, it's not problematic, but in the wrong hands, it turns into something incredibly problematic, right? So I hope I'm articulating myself well, but again, share your thoughts on all of this down below in the comments. But the ending scene, when Starling shows up at his house, she's looking for a woman who had known one of the victims, only to then eventually realize that this is the killer. Like, wow, what a tense scene in both book and movie. And in both, Jame blacks out the house, blacks out the lights, and he puts on his night goggles, which was just so creepy. And then when he cocks the gun to shoot her, she hears it. And so she fires in his direction. And wow, again, just showing how smart and quick and capable Starling is. And yeah, this scene was just fantastic in both book and movie. But then one complaint I do have with the book, as far as Jame Gumb is concerned, is that in the end, once he is killed, the FBI learn all of these details about his life. And so we get this exposition dump where we're just told about his past. And at this point in the story, I didn't even care. And it just kind of ruined the pacing and the flow of the book. And so if Harris wanted to give us this backstory, I think he should have done it the way he did in Red Dragon, because we learn about the killer's backstory in that as well. But it's done earlier on, as we are in Francis Dollarhide's perspective, we are getting details from his past. And so that the pacing and the flow of the book worked so much better when the information was given to us in that way. Whereas, here at the very end, at this point, I didn't even care and it just seemed unnecessary. And so unnecessary that all of these details about his past aren't even in the movie. But I also wanted to talk about the head that Clarice Starling finds, thanks to Hannibal Lecter telling her about it, because that is different from book to movie, because in the movie, the head belongs to a man named Raspiel, but we don't learn too many details on him in the film, whereas in the book, it belonged to a man named Claus. And Raspiel had been a real-life client of Lecter's. And Lecter claims that Raspiel had told him that he and Claus were lovers, and then Raspiel ends up killing Claus. However, we learn that the truth, though, is that Raspiel was truly a client of Lecter's, and he tells Lecter that Raspiel had been dating Jame Gumb. However, he leaves Jame to be with this guy named Claus, and Jame gets jealous, and so he kills Claus. And then from here, Lecter kills Raspiel. And it's funny because this client, his death, because then later Lecter is having people over for dinner and he serves them part of Raspiel. And this is included in the 2002 movie Red Dragon. That's how it starts out. And so I thought that was a cool inclusion in the Red Dragon film. At the time, I didn't know they were referencing this book. But yeah, and so because Gumb is the one who killed Claus, that is why he has the moth cocoon in his mouth. Because at this time when he killed Claus is when he started to become fascinated with this idea of transformation. And yeah, both book and movie feature moths on the cover. And it is because, Jame Gumb, Buffalo Bill, breeds death head moths. And then when he kills his victims, he puts one of these cocoons in their mouths because this is all very ritualistic for him, right? And it's, symbolic of his transformation. And so yeah, this process has a lot of rituals that are part of it, including the cocoon, but also in the book, he'll watch videotapes of who he thinks is his mom, and he'll just watch them on repeat prior to the killing of someone. And the death head moths, they are not natural to the US habitat. And so when she goes to Jame Gumb's home, she sees one of these, and that is when she realizes who this person truly is because this moth flies up. But then also I wanted to share a quote from the book. When when they find the cocoon in the mouth, they take it to these scientists who are very knowledgeable. And so when she is with them, one of them tells her, "Most people love butterflies and hate moths," he said, "but moths are more interesting, engaging. They're destructive," Starling says. "Some are, a lot are, but they live in all kinds of ways, just like we do. There's a moth, more than one in fact, that lives only on tears. That's all they eat or drink." What kind of tears? Whose tears? The tears of large land animals about our size. The old definition of moth was anything that gradually, silently eats, consumes, or wastes any other thing. It was a verb for destruction, too. And then later on, Clarice thinks to herself, over this odd world, this half the world that's dark now, I have to hunt a thing that lives on tears. And so yeah, that too, obviously, we see the parallel between moths and Buffalo Bill. But one detail about the book that was not in the movie I also wanted to mention real quick is about Crawford, because in the book, we learn that his wife is dying dying and they are doing at-home hospice. And I did like this detail in the book, and I feel like it added a lot to his character, but I also understand why the movie cut it. Sorry, my kitty just jumped up and she's going to join us now for the end of this video, as long as she behaves. It's actually her birthday today. She's 1 year old now. Anyway, it is now time to move on to book versus movie. So yeah, this adaptation was incredible. But the book, like, it's so faithful, and what makes it incredible is the fact that it came from such a great source material, right? And I had already seen this movie before reading the book, and yet while reading the book, I was just so captivated and enthralled, and I could not put it down. And I think Clarice, she almost feels even more fleshed out in the book, and I felt like I understood her even more in the book. And yet, having said that, the portrayal by Jodie Foster was of course incredible, and she really brought the character to life. And it's tough as far as which one wins, because there are some things about the movie I prefer, and yet there are other things that I prefer with the book. And so, I mean, I feel like it's the general consensus is usually that the movie wins when it comes to this one, but I almost feel like it doesn't even matter which one I say wins, because this is one I could flip-flop on all day long, like I said, because both were fantastic. And so I feel inclined to say that the movie wins, and yet having said that, the book is incredible. I loved it so much. And if you're a fan of the movie, the book is definitely worth reading, because yeah, they're very similar, and yet there's still so much to love about the book. And I kind of had the same feelings when it came to Red Dragon versus Manhunter. That one, I think I said the movie won for that episode as well, but that's another case where the book was also fantastic too. So Thomas Harris, right now, he is 2 for 2, 2 incredible books, both of which were adapted into incredible movies. Oh my gosh, she's trying to go after my earrings. I got these butterfly earrings specifically for this video, of course. But anyway, that wraps it up for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. This one has been a long time coming, I would say, right? Because this is one of the most famous adaptations there are. And so yeah, I'm glad I have finally covered it. And let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And like I said, I will be covering the 3rd book and movie. I don't know about the 4th, but I for sure want to do the 3rd. So that one will be coming in the next few months. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you next time. Bye. Say bye to Kitty.